At the same time, you're trying to sort out all the things that follow from a death. You're going through their belongings, the paperwork, and then there's a knock at the door. It's not from a well-wisher, but it's from HMRC. Hello? We've come to value your relative's estate. That is what Andy Burnham's scheme could mean. The taxman intruding on the private grief of hundreds of thousands of regular families every year right across the country. It's the tax that Andy Burnham conspicuously refused to rule out yesterday. A universal death tax. A tax that he has been pushing for nigh on 20 years. In a white paper as Health Secretary in 2010, in his first leadership bid in 2015, in 2021 at a fringe meeting, in the Makerfield by-election, everything was on the table. And as the Prime Minister says, difficult decisions are coming. He's ruled out plenty of other taxes, but he won't, he can't, he will not rule out the death tax. It's a tax that the public has rejected, not once, not twice, but 4 separate times. Yet still Andy Burnham seems to return to it. Why? Not just because he wants to change social care, no. If that was his sole aim, there are other ways to fund it, like cutting foreign aid or benefits for migrants. No. He's shown again and again that he thinks the savings that you've earned, no matter how little, that you've scrimped and saved for, that you've been taxed on, whether you're rich or poor, he says the taxman deserves a bit more. No one doubts that Andy Burnham possesses more charm than Keir Starmer. I know that's a low bar. But have we stopped to ask, what is he actually selling? On the big questions so far, there's a bunch of false promises and fantasy ideas that he can fix social care and worry about the costs another time, or that he can grow the economy in every postcode for British people, but water down immigration reforms to let in some more cheap migrant workers. And finally, that 700 people can cross the channel in small boats yesterday, tens of thousands this year, and that means his government's plan is actually working. He's like Labour's answer to the Pied Piper. He's playing an enticing tune, but actually leading them and our country into more desperate trouble. I'm not surprised that Nigel Farage was the only party leader that Andy Burnham wouldn't invite to discuss his idea. Despite the fact that reform provides £8 billion of social care through the 30 councils that we run. Because Andy Burnham knows, rightly to be fair, that Nigel will never go along with a betrayal of people who've paid in their whole lives. And make no mistake, that is what Andy Burnham is planning to do. That is the purpose of the talks that the other parties are now engaged in. Andy Burnham says that difficult decisions lie ahead. But let's be honest. That is Westminster politicians speak for tax rises lie ahead. Why not just be straight with people? Going after hard-working Brits on modest salaries with only a little in savings is the exact opposite of what reform stands for. We stand for protecting British workers and putting them first. And as people begin to consider what this means for them and their family, many will understandably be very worried. Why can't he be straight with them? Why can't he just say what he is actually planning to do? Why cause them all this uncertainty and worry? Let me tell you how a universal death tax would actually work. Why this is a cruel and punitive tax. Today, whatever its faults, and clearly inheritance tax has many, it at least has a threshold. So that means that if you saved a little over the years, hundreds of pounds, a few £1,000s, or indeed a larger amount, up to £325,000 as an individual, you can pass that on to your family. Andy Burnham's levy is different. It has no threshold, no allowance, no minimum limit whatsoever. Everything goes in. The family heirlooms, your mother's wedding ring, if you've got a watch to hand on, and nothing else, it's taxed. A couple of pieces of jewelry, taxed. Even clothes, taxed. Think what that means. Think what that means for the least well-off families in this country. An estate of a few £100s in a post office account. A bit of furniture, the sofa, the telly, a small policy would somehow have to be catalogued, valued, and assessed. By who? Solicitors? Probate valuers? Officials? What, people charging fees for the smallest estates? The cost of the assessment alone might swallow the inheritance in whole. The state would spend £500 to take £300. Grieving families would undoubtedly be dragged through months of paperwork for the privilege of being left with next to nothing. And remember, this is the important point. Brits are already amongst the most heavily taxed people on earth when we die. Of the 38 OECD nations, Britain already runs the 5th harshest death tax regime. Nearly half of those countries don't tax children's inheritance at all, and rightly so. Australia scrapped death duties. Canada scrapped them. Even Sweden scrapped them because they raised very little, because they were despised, because they destroyed a lot. And Andy Burnham looks at all that. He looks at all of that and concludes, you know what? Britain doesn't tax death enough. To raise the £18 billion he needs for his plans, this tax would need to sit on top of the inheritance tax levied on the rich. That means together, Burnham's death tax and our existing inheritance tax would cost families almost £30 billion a year. Britain would become the single worst place to give money to your kids in the Western world. And it would be worse than that, because it would also make the UK the only country in the whole of the West to tax all savings with no allowance whatsoever. This is a truly extreme proposal. Is this the make-a-feel test that we were promised by Andy Burnham when he was out on the stump? Well, take a nurse. Take a nurse in Makerfield who's worked her whole life in the NHS. She passes away. Maybe she passes away far too young, only a few years after retiring. She owns a house in Makerfield worth £200,000. She's not rich, but she worked hard and she saved for that home. She gets a lump sum of £100,000 on death from the NHS pension scheme. Under the current rules, none of that would be taxed. And I think we can all agree, quite right so. But under Andy Burnham's death tax, her children would have to pay £30,000 to the taxman, plus the form filling, the worry, the things they'd have to do when they should be grieving for their lost mother. I sometimes wonder if people in the political and media establishment think people are swimming in money out there in the real world. Most people don't inherit very much money at all. And the poorest in society inherit very small sums. But it makes a very big difference to their lives, particularly at times like this, where people are finding life tough. In fact, when the poorest 20% get an inheritance, it makes up 44% of their wealth. Are you going to tax that and make their family account for it to HMRC? And who would actually pay for it? It's not going to be the rich. The rich have family offices. They have offshore structures. They have accountants on retainers. They will have planned their way around this levy long before the bill has even reached its first reading in Parliament. We all know that. We've seen this before. A flat tax with no floor doesn't catch the millionaires or the billionaires. It catches the widow in the bungalow. It catches the elderly pensioner with the savings book. The Duke keeps his estate, the dinner lady loses hers. It's always the same way. The clever money moves, the honest money pays. And think finally of the sheer indignity of it all. An official standing in your late mother's bedroom with a clipboard, pricing up her engagement ring, the brooch that you'd always admired and she said would be yours, that you'd carry to remember her. The taxman totting up her coats in her wardrobe, itemizing a life that's been characterized by work, thrift, prudence, love of family, so that the Treasury can take its cut. And then what of all the unanswered questions? Will farmers be exempted? Or will they face yet another attack? What of family businesses? We're surely not going to repeat all the angst for them that Rachel Reeves created last year. 2026 will be marked by protests of tractors on Whitehall, just as 2024 and 2025 were. Will husbands and wives have to pay when the other dies? They did under Andy Burnham's white paper. People are worried now, and they can't wait a year for an answer. Now, others will ask, how else do we pay for care? Because we all see the flaws of the present system. Nobody denies that. Nobody's blind to the problems. Nobody who's watched a parent pass through it could deny it. I have, as an MP, as a grandson, and more recently as a son. I don't doubt the Prime Minister's sincerity either. The system needs to change, but not necessarily the change that he's looking at. For a Prime Minister who's claimed that he cares about localism, it is striking that his first big policy is not to devolve, but to build a national bureaucracy that takes power from local councils. Care in Haringey will always be different to care in Herefordshire, and rightly so. He's going to create another office full of bureaucrats deciding who gets what. The government is currently trying and failing to abolish NHS England, a giant overbearing quango. And what? We're going to create another one for NHS care? I'm not at all convinced that this will help anyone to get better quality care. And that is what we should care about. I also want to ensure that we end the evident profiteering from the system. Large private equity-backed care home companies extracting money, sometimes fleecing families and local councils. I've spoken this week to reform-controlled councils who told me about a care company hiking prices when they need to get somebody into a bed late at night on a Friday, charging exorbitant bills out of all proportion. That has to stop. But I'm not at all convinced that Andy Burnham's proposal is going to fix that. Here's 3 better ways, in fact. First, the system needs to talk to itself. Today, a hospital in one town can barely read the records of a care home in the next. Discharge notes are printed off. They're still faxed, for goodness sake. faxed in 2026 in some parts of the system. They're typed by hand. Elderly patients are marooned in beds for weeks, costing thousands of pounds a week, because the NHS and the care system can't pass a simple file between them. One patient, one record, from ward to care home to GP. End the block beds, the botched discharges, and the savings run into billions. The one system we had that seemed to be fixing this problem was a technology system provided by a company called Palantir. It reduces discharge delays by 15%. And what is Burnham proposing to do? Well, he said that he's considering scrapping it from the NHS, scrapping the one thing that seems to be working. Well, why? Because the same firm apparently sells technology to the Israelis, and the British Islamists were unhappy about it. So to play to the gallery, get a few votes back, he's going to scrap the tech that's actually working to help discharge in hospitals. That doesn't sound to me like the actions of a man who cares about fixing things, who puts delivery above ideology. Second, the second way to fix this is to scrap the waste and spend it on care. Before this government spends a penny from a dead pensioner's estate, it can take the billions we hand every year in foreign aid. As Chancellor in a reform government, I could not look the British taxpayer in the eye and impose a tax, another tax, take a penny off them in tax, before I had stopped sending taxpayers' money to rich countries overseas. How about stopping spending billions in benefits for those who've never paid in, or the millions a day in hotels for channel migrants, or the quangos that nobody voted for, the consultants on £1,000 a day that we see across the public sector, the layers of NHS management that have never once emptied a bedpan. That is not simply about spending more. This country does not lack money for care. It lacks a government with the courage and determination to put its own people first. And thirdly, and here is one point on which Andy Burnham and I agree, pay care workers properly. Care is skilled, demanding, often heartbreaking work, and today it is scandalously underpaid. Care workers have been treated like dirt by successive governments, especially during the pandemic. A very good friend of mine, who was a care worker during that time, used to phone my wife and I and cry down the phone line. She felt no one cared, not her employer, not the government. These people deserve better. Reform exists for decent, hard-working people like this who are being let down day in, day out, but continue to get up early in the morning to go to work, to put their heart and soul into their job for the good of the community and for the good of their family. But here's the truth that no other party will say. You cannot raise the wages of British care workers while importing a limitless supply of cheap labour to undercut them. This is precisely what has happened. Hundreds of thousands recruited from overseas on wages no British worker could live on, while the sector went nowhere. The soft bigotry of low expectations, in which it's said by the establishment that no self-respecting Brit would do this work. Therefore, we must import cheap labour from overseas. 80% of care workers are Brits. We should be on their side. End the undercutting of their wages. Pay a decent wage to carers so that they can raise a family on it and make it affordable for people to care for their own families. Family, community, country, those are the principles on which reform is built. Do that, and you will discover that Britain doesn't have a shortage of carers. It has a shortage of respect for carers, and reform will fix that. Let me end with this. Think what this whole episode says about our politics. A tax that the public has rejected 4 times. And each time the political class waits a few years, changes the wrapping paper, and asks the same question again. This is how broken Westminster has become. The people gave their answer, and the system simply rejects it and repeats the same question. Reform is different. We believe that money taxed when you earned it, taxed when you saved it, and taxed when you spent it should not be taxed a 4th time when you're laid to rest. We believe a family's home is a legacy. It's not a revenue stream. We believe that the proper response of the British state to the death of someone in their family is sympathy, not a valuation, not a knock on the door by the taxman. Andy Burnham may see this as his legacy, but your legacy is not his to take. It is your legacy, not his. So here is Reform's pledge. We will fight this tax, not as opposition for opposition's sake, but because it is unfair, impractical, and cruel on the people of this country. Because it cuts to the heart of something we in Reform understand is a deep human emotion. The desire to own a home, the desire to pass on what little you've saved to your children and your grandchildren. Because when we say we're change, we mean it. Hard-working Brits come first, every time. My message to Andy Burnham: rule out this tax. End the uncertainty. End the worry. Today. If not, don't ask Westminster. Ask the public. Call a general election. Thank you very much indeed. Now, I've got some questions from the press, and the first is from Olivia Utley from GB News. Good morning, Olivia.
Good morning. A death tax is currently just one possibility that Andy Burnham may or may not be considering. Isn't the best way of avoiding it to work constructively with the Prime Minister, pushing forward your own alternative plans? And if you were asked to such a meeting, would you go along and work with other parties on social care reform?
Well, we have been working constructively. Baroness Casey invited Reform to be part of her review, and we've participated in that. But as you know, Andy Burnham has chosen not to invite Reform to be part of the talks that have begun this week. As I said in my remarks, I find that, in one sense, strange and insulting, because Reform runs 30 councils across the country who are actually at the coalface of this problem, having to manage the mess that the Labour Party and the Conservative Party left for them. But on the other hand, entirely understandable, because Nigel Farage, alone amongst the party leaders, has been very, very clear that we do not support increasing taxes. We will fight the death tax, or indeed any other tax on hard-working people if there is an alternative proposed instead. If we were invited, yes, we would participate. But I tell you what Nigel would say to Andy Burnham. He'd be crystal clear: end the uncertainty today, don't leave people hanging for the course of the next year or so, rule out the death tax now. That would be our condition. That's what we would say in the first meeting, and I'm frankly astonished that others haven't done so already. Next I've got Harry Farley from the BBC. Harry.
Thank you, Mr. Jenrick. Reform has been facing many weeks of questions about its donations and the source of those donations. And The Guardian this morning is reporting that George Cottrell gave his mother more than $2 million shortly before she then donated to Reform. Is there any form of internal investigation going on in Reform? And are you 100% confident that the money has come from permissible donors under UK elections law?
Look, the donations you're referring to were some time ago. This has been going on for a long time. But we are entirely confident that Reform followed all electoral rules at the time when the donations were made. Of course, we'll participate with any inquiries. To the best of my knowledge, we haven't even been contacted by the police. So I don't think we have anything more to add to that. I presume you don't have a question about the actual substance of the press conference today. No. Okay.
If I'm allowed to ask another one, I will.
Well, it would have been better to ask that one first, but if you want to actually ask about the issues that the public care about, then by all means.
Well, I was going to ask, if I'm allowed to ask a separate one, then you've talked about the tax that didn't have any thresholds, but would you support or would you consider supporting a tax that an extra levy to fund social care, perhaps if there was some form of threshold?
No. Look, if I was the Chancellor faced with this challenge, I would not tax hard-working people a single penny when we had not yet stopped paying foreign aid to rich countries, stopped the net zero madness that's costing us tens of billions of pounds, stopped paying benefits to people who are not even British citizens, stop the small boats crisis, which is costing us £1 billion in hotels and bedsits the length and breadth of the country, cut out the waste, use that money to support British people with their challenges, including social care. Get that job done before you start reaching into the pockets and the life savings of the best people in this country who've worked hard their whole lives, built up a small nest egg, and just want to be able to hand that on to their children and their grandchildren. That's my message to Andy Burnham today. I've got Faye Brown now from Sky News. Faye.
On the issue of care workers, what would reform UK government pay British care workers, and can you set out how you would fund an increase to their wages? And if I may just ask on the row that has happened with Zach Polanski, Reform UK said last night that it was two-tier policing, that the Met didn't take any action. Can you set out what action you expected the Met to take, and if you think that he should have been arrested or even jailed for what he says was a mistake?
Well, look, it's not for me to to tell the police how to do their jobs, but we've seen numerous examples of people who have had a knock on the door from the police, who've been arrested, who've even been prosecuted for what they said on social media. And it does seem curious that in this case the police have chosen not to take action. We'll see whether they take action against the individual who posted the original tweet, who wore the T-shirt. I'm hearing today that the police may have closed that investigation as well. If that is the case, then look, that does look like two-tier policing to me. Remember the context here. Remember the context. You've got just a few weeks from the murder of one of our colleagues, Anne Widdecombe. You have a man in Nigel Farage who's been subject to 600 threats in recent times, many of them credible, serious threats, where a man has been arrested for threatening to kill him in recent weeks, where a man is serving in prison an illegal migrant for literally coming into this country for the express purpose of killing Nigel Farage. And in those circumstances, the police are saying that it doesn't warrant further investigation for somebody to wear a T-shirt emblazoned with a guillotine dripping in blood, saying it's preparing for the death of Nigel Farage. That I find astonishing and unacceptable. On your first point regarding care workers, look, as I said in my remarks, I think care workers are scandalously underpaid. And it's been a consensus amongst the Conservative Party and the Labour Party that the answer to that is not to pay care workers more or to improve their training, their career progression, their terms and conditions, but just to import a load of people from overseas, which actually has the effect of undercutting their wages and making the situation even worse. So you get paid more to work in Lidl's or Aldi than to work in care. That situation has to end. Reform have a number of practical answers to this. Firstly, we're going to stop all the visas for care workers coming into this country. So the care sector will have to recruit people from this country. Remember, 80% of care workers are Brits today. They'll have to recruit more Brits. That means people will have to be paid more, and they'll have to be treated better. Secondly, we've said that we're going to scrap Rachel Reeves's employers' national insurance increase for British workers. So those care homes who are employing British workers rather than foreign workers will get a big tax cut, which they can use to pay their workforce better. And look, if we have to pay more for care in order to have a British workforce and to reward those care workers, then I think we should do. And that should be a priority. and I'll just end by saying this, that this, in the long term, is a big saving to the Exchequer, because it was a massive mistake by the bean counters at the Treasury to think that importing somebody from Bangladesh to work in a care home with all their family members, who then use all of the public services in this country, was a saving. It's going to cost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds more in the years ahead. So it would have been a lot cheaper, as well as better, for British people just to have paid a British care worker more in the first place. That's an argument that Nigel Farage and myself have been making for a very long time. It will take a reform government, I'm sure, to implement that in practice. We've got Romilly now, Romilly Weeks from ITV. Romilly.
Thank you. You've set out in very vivid terms why you're opposed to a tax that Andy Burnham hasn't yet said that he is actually committed to. But what would you say to the many, many millions of people already having to sell their homes to fund care? Is it not disingenuous to claim to be protecting their legacy when so many are already ending up with nothing? And a second question, if I may, on George Cottrell. You said some time ago as though that doesn't matter. You say that you're sure that the rules were followed at all time. But what explanation is there for George Cottrell transferring $2 million to his mother shortly before she made very substantial donations to reform?
Well, firstly, on the donation, as I said earlier, reform is certain that all the electoral rules were followed. If you've got a question for Mr. Cottrell, then I think you have to direct that to him. With respect to the tax proposal...
But he really doesn't answer questions, so I'm directing it to you.
Well, let me come to your second question. With respect to that, there's a simple choice for Andy Burnham. He has proposed the death tax in the past. In fact, he's been proposing this for nigh on 20 years. If he no longer supports it, rule it out. He's ruled out other tax increases in recent days. He was conspicuously absent in ruling this out at his press conference this week. We're calling on him today, rule out the death tax, end the uncertainty, enable families to move forward with their lives without the worry and the angst that will follow. And the difference between this and the present situation is very clear. This is universal. Absolutely everyone in this country, from the poorest person to the richest in the land, will have to pay that. I think that's unfair, it's cruel, and Reform are going to campaign against it. I've got Bethany Dawson now from LBC.
Are you not going to answer on George Cottrell?
I did answer it. I said that we followed all of the rules. Bethany.
Hi. You've spoken about how you oppose this tax with it having no exemptions or thresholds. How do you know there are no exemptions or thresholds where he's not even set out the tax and said what he will or won't do in terms of funding? And if I may, there seems to be actually quite a lot that you and Andy Burnham appear to agree on, based on what he said yesterday, from supporting care workers, but also by making savings from reducing blocked beds and increasing efficiencies. Indeed, Nigel Farage has previously said that social care and the NHS should be integrated. This sounds like there's a lot to agree on. If Andy Burnham does rule out a death tax, will you be happy with Labour's proposals?
Well, look, we want to work with the government on this. We all want to see the care system improved. But it's a fundamental dimension to this. How is it going to be paid for? And Andy Burnham seems to be willing to talk about the easy things. How might you reform the system? How might you make it better? But not to confront how it's actually going to be paid for. He's got to be honest with the British public and say, how is he going to pay for it? And look, if he will rule out any increase in taxes, then obviously we will welcome that. But he's refused to do so. And we're going to keep pushing him every day until he does. Because there will be people across the country who will be very, very worried about this now. Why create all of that anger and worry? Look, Andy Burnham says that he's a different type of politician. But when I watched his press conference yesterday, it seemed like typical Westminster politician to me to say that difficult decisions lie ahead, but not to spell out what they are. They're tax rises. That's what lies ahead. Just be honest. Say what they are, and then try and sell that to the public. I don't think the public will want them. If they do, then so be it. But call a general election and test that with them. I've got Jason Groves now from the Daily Mail. Jason.
Hiya, thank you. you're obviously not keen on this social care levy, death tax, whatever you want to call it. Can you commit now that a reform government would scrap it if it came in? Also, do you think that foreign care workers should be exempted from these ILR reforms, as seems to be now suggested? And finally, you mentioned briefly the small boat crossings. Obviously, we pay a lot of money to France. Yesterday, there were scenes of the gendarmes stood around saying they've been told not to intervene. Should we be looking to get some of that money back?
On the first question, look, if Andy Burnham proceeds with this death tax, then yes, reform will scrap it. We can't let this stand. It's cruel, it's unfair, and it'd have to go. Sorry, what's your second question, Jason? Apologies. Yes, look, reform will abolish ILR. It's simple as that. So it's not a question of whether there will be exemptions to it. We're going to abolish it. So if you come to this country, you'll have to meet our very stringent economic test in terms of whether you will be a net contributor to the British economy. And then you'll have to continue to renew your visa until such time as you can apply for naturalisation. So that we'll be very, very clear on that. And I'd urge Andy Burnham to take forward, at a bare minimum, the weak proposals that Shabana Mahmood has taken forwards. And then with respect to France, look, this is a complete and utter waste of money. We can see that it's achieving absolutely nothing. I've seen it with my own eyes when I'm in France. The French authorities are literally waving these individuals onto the boats. Enough is enough. We should not be sending any more money to France, and in fact Reform has already said that it wouldn't just end this arrangement, but it would seek a rebate from the French for it, because we're quite clearly being taken for fools. I've got Nick Guttridge now from The Telegraph.
Thank you. In your remarks, you said that almost half of OECD countries rightly don't levy any inheritance tax at all. There's been a bit of toing and froing over the last sort of 18 months about Reform's position on inheritance tax. Can you clear that up? Would a Reform government completely abolish inheritance tax for everyone? And seeing as everyone else seems to be asking an off-topic one, if the FIFA president goes ahead with his plan to sell off the World Cup to private investors, should England boycott it?
Well, on the first point, look, inheritance tax is one of the most unpopular taxes, and we recognise that at Reform. If you think inheritance tax is bad, it is like a parking ticket compared to the death tax that Andy Burnham has proposed. This is universal. It will apply to everyone without any threshold. That is why we feel so strongly about that, and will fight it every step of the way. As regards to FIFA and Infantino, look, I never thought I would say this, but I think he's starting to make Sepp Blatter look like an honest and decent and upstanding person. We will obviously oppose the privatisation of this. Football belongs to the fans, and Reform has been very clear on that. I've got Aaron Newbury now from the Daily Express. Aaron.
Good morning. Just to come back on the point made earlier, you did say in your speech that other countries don't tax children's inheritance at all, and that you did say, and rightly so. So are you able to say, if it's believed to be a right thing to do, that a Reform government would say no more taxing on inheritance at all? And on the row with Zach Polanski, what do you think Zach Polanski needs to do to clean up his party and make it clear to his members and affiliates and supporters that the sort of behaviour he engaged in is not acceptable?
Well, he could resign, I suppose. Look, I'm not here to give advice to Zach Polanski. He seems like a nasty piece of work to me, and people are starting to realise that. But what I think he could have done in Newsnight on the interview he did was apologise to Nigel Farage. What would a decent person do in that situation? Apologise. But he couldn't bring himself to do that. With respect to inheritance tax, look, our position for a long time has been that inheritance tax is an unfair tax. It's double taxation. If Brits were to draw up a list of the taxes that they dislike the most, inheritance tax would be very high up on that list. If there's the fiscal headroom available to us, of course we would love to reform it. But the point today is, why take an evidently unfair and unpopular tax like inheritance tax, and apply it universally to absolutely everyone in this country. If you think inheritance tax is unpopular, wait till you see what this death tax is going to be like. I've got Tom Scottson now from The Sun. Tom.
Thank you. How much would you need to cut out of the current expenditure to form Reform's social care plan? And what would that look like? And also, a second, if I may, just on the Calais question, would this mean getting British boots on the ground in the French beaches to stop migrants coming over?
The question I was asked a moment ago was whether or not we should stop giving money to the French. Yes, absolutely. Cut off the money tomorrow. There's no point sending good money after bad. My view on the small boats crisis for a long time has been, you don't rely on the kindness of strangers to secure your own borders. Take responsibility for securing your borders. Create your own sovereign deterrent. That means detaining and deporting absolutely everyone who steps foot on British soil, sending them back to where they came from, whether that's France or somewhere else. And frankly, I don't care where it is in the world, whether it's Afghanistan or Eritrea. They have no business coming to the UK. And if you say you're going to do whatever it takes, do whatever it takes. And that means absolutely nothing should be off the table. And then, sorry, what was the other question you had? Sorry, Aaron. Oh, how much? Well, look, we're going to have to wait to see what Andy Burnham's proposals are. We at Reform have set out some of the costings, and they are very, very large. They could be £18 billion. Local councils currently spend £35 billion on social care, so it could be more than that. If Andy Burnham sought to nationalise the current privately owned care home estate, that would be another £34 billion. And most people who've looked into this issue in the past have concluded that were the system to be a nationalised care system, the costs would quickly escalate, as they have in pretty much every other example of a free at the point of delivery service. And so I think we can be clear that a death tax of 10% would only just be the start, and it could very quickly escalate from there. I've got Rhiannon James now from PA. Rhiannon.
Thank you. In April, Nigel Farage said he was in talks to appoint a health and social care spokesperson, and he mentioned a former NHS trust boss could be in the run-in for that. That hasn't materialised, and you still don't have one. So do you think that suggests that, addressing issues such as social care, such as the social care crisis, isn't a priority for Reform, and you're just not taking it seriously?
No. We're holding this press conference today. Have other opposition parties held a press conference dedicated to social care and this response? I haven't seen them. Reform is currently running 30 local authorities across the country which have responsibility for social care, more than any of the other political parties. We are absolutely at the coalface of this, trying to do our utmost to support people in difficult times. Don't tell us we don't care about this issue. We really do. What we don't want to see is hard-working Brits have to pick up the price of that for losing their home, losing their nest egg, not being able to hand that on to their children and their grandchildren. That's the point that we're making today. But thank you. I've got James Heal now from The Spectator. James.
Good morning. A two-parter, if I may. First of all, your speech had a reference to the landed aristocracy at one point. Reform is supposed to be a radical party. I wonder, therefore, whether you might be more amenable to wealth taxes overall than the Conservatives. And second of all, Nigel Farage has resigned, triggering a by-election over the standards process into him. One of your colleagues in Parliament has called that a kangaroo court. Is that language that you would use too?
Well, I think I did use it. You may actually be referring to me, James, there. Look, I'm not here to cast aspersions on the Standards Commissioner or the officials that work with him. The point that I made in the past is that all the other political party leaders have already prejudged the issue. Kemi Badenoch has said that she will stand a candidate in the next by-election. Well, What is the next by-election? The by-election after Nigel Farage has been found guilty? That's the point here. You know, it is not for Kemi Badenoch, Andy Burnham, Ed Davey, Zach Polanski, or any other politician to play judge, jury, and executioner of Nigel Farage. At the end of the day, we live in a democracy. It's for the people to determine. If the people of Clacton get behind Nigel with knowledge of all of the facts and say, we want this man to be our Member of Parliament, then let that be the determiner of who represents the people of Clacton in the House of Commons. That's the point of this by-election. It is the people versus the establishment. And look, having been to Clacton a number of times, I have every confidence that the people of Clacton are going to support Nigel every step of the way. With respect to the landed aristocracy, look, the way I see reform is this. The Labour Party is for Benefit Street. The Tory Party is for Belgravia. Reform exists for the 80% in the middle. The hard-working, decent people of this country, the workers and the people who worked their whole lives and are now retired and just simply want dignity and security in the last decades of their lives. So our policies will be for them. Our policies will not be for Benefit Street, nor will they be for the richest in the land. That's why everything that I have done so far as Reform Shadow Chancellor has been focused on those people. Cut taxes for working people, like no tax on overtime, like saying that we'll scrap Rachel Reeves's job-destroying increase in employers' national insurance for British workers, like saying we'll stick with the triple lock to support pensioners. That gives you a sense of what a reform government would do. Always for the 80% in the middle, never for Benefit Street, and not for Belgravia either. I've got Teddy Stoddart now from Bloomberg. Teddy.
Good morning, Robert. Thank you. You name-checked Palantir specifically when you spoke today as a valid provider of sort of single patient records. But clinicians have told us that there's other homegrown alternatives such as Cypher, and I was wondering whether Reform has a preference for homegrown tech. And a follow-up question, not a follow-up question, a second question, on whether Reform considers itself confident that it knows the source of George Cottrell's wealth.
Well, on your second question, I don't think there's anything more to add. I've already said that we've followed all the electoral rules, and we're very confident of that. On your first point, look, I said a few weeks ago that a Reform government is always going to put British people first. It's always going to put British businesses first. And so one of the changes that I would make as Chancellor is to rewrite our procurement rules so that we scrap all of the nonsense that has been ladled into them over recent times, like David Cameron's social value test that said things like people getting contracts off the government need to provide foreign languages or diverse workforce plans, and simply go for best value for money for the taxpayer, and can it be provided by a British company? So yes, we do have a preference for British businesses. But the point I was making earlier was, it seems very odd to me that somebody who's posing as being concerned to just get their hands dirty and fix problems for the benefit of patients would be considering scrapping a technology that demonstrably is working to reduce waiting lists and to get people out of hospitals swiftly and into care homes or back home to their own home and improve the quality of treatment in the system. And I suspect the motivation is not AI sovereignty or British companies getting the contracts, but it's because there's some people on the hard left who don't like a company that happens to provide a bit of tech to Israel or the United States getting contracts. And look, in Reform, we have a preference for British businesses, but we're never going to put mad hard left ideology above making sure the NHS actually functions properly and we help patients. And then lastly, I have Noah Keat from Politico. Noah.
Thank you very much. You've called for Andy Burnham to call a general election. How is Reform's candidate selection process going, particularly the vetting of candidates after the incidents the party faced at the previous general election?
Very good. Look, we are ready for a general election. We're writing our manifesto. We're already selecting candidates. We have, by the way, thousands of extremely talented people who are coming forwards. I think the candidates that Reform will put forward will be a total breath of fresh air. You know, we have people who are from all walks of life, people who've run businesses, veterans, farmers, care workers, white van men. I think people will see a group of people coming forward for public service, determined to fix this country, the like of which we haven't seen for a very long time in British politics. Andy Burnham does not have a mandate to take forward huge changes to our country and our tax system, like the imposition of this death tax. It has been rejected time and again by the British people, so our message is very clear. If he wants to test it, don't just do it in Parliament with his majority. Have a general election. Have the courage of his convictions to put this to the people, and Reform will be ready. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks very much for your time today. I really appreciate it.